have something a colleague of mine, Kabir Bubner, is doing that we're starting to implement more with teams that we work with, is something called a constraints-led approach, where you take something away within the game environment. So, for example, communication, you take it away at a certain phase of a game, and with the intention to sort of direct attention towards something that's missing or something that emerges as a result of thing. And I think there's real promise with something like that. And there's promise at different levels. Like perhaps the base level would be, if you're playing 3, 6 or more games, it's at least some variety. Like you are at least experiencing a different perspective on a game. Maybe you're drawing attention to just how important something like communication is and how to use it. Perhaps more so, it maybe directs your attention to using the minimap more to understand where your jungler is at a given time, that kind of stuff. So I think there is emerging work there, but it's acceptance, and then it's, can we deliver it to coaches in a way where they start with, why do I want to take this away? So not just blindly doing it.
Yeah, I mean, at some point I'm definitely getting Kabir on to talk about this as well.
Yes.
It's something I'm a big fan of and have done a lot in my career, although I wouldn't have called it a constraints-led approach. But some of the examples, there was a team actually that I was on where for a decent part of the season, if we had played ourselves and one team wasn't allowed to talk, the team that wasn't allowed to talk would have won the game. basically 9 times out of 10.
Oh my god!
And so that was actually a really good thing to do, to start saying like, okay, we're going to have no talking at all. We're going to have talking only after a certain point. Having the no talking is one of the things that I think can be very useful for that, is making sure that everyone's using pings properly, because just because you've said something doesn't mean people have seen it or heard it. And so you should always be integrating pings as well, but we often don't realize until we start having these kind of no talking before 15 minutes, and you realize that actually you can communicate a lot just with pings, and also people can intuit this kind of thing. A great way to sell it that has luckily happened in the last year is that the best team fighting team of all time by a substantial margin is JDG from last year, potentially one of the best teams of all time, let alone but definitely the best team fighting team. They didn't all speak the same language. So if you think we have to be non-stop talking in team fights, I mean, maybe we should be, but if you think we have to be, then this just makes absolutely no sense at all. But you can also get quite specific around some of these constraints, or I used to call them obstructions, just because in one of my favorite movies is Lars von Trier movie it's called The 5 Obstructions, and it's just remaking the same film with or he gets his mentor to remake the same film with a bunch of different constraints. Like one of them is every shot has to be half a second long or something like that, and all this kind of thing. So they're real extreme constraints. But one of the things that I did, I don't know if you were, I can't remember if you guys were there helping us at the same time, we did with Solari, was we made a rule that we were not going to take Dragon in practice. Like we were not allowed to take Dragon. And I can actually, now I'm not involved anymore, I can go through the kind of step-by-step of how we got there.
Yeah, please.
The first is that this was before Dragons were buffed, so I wouldn't necessarily do the same thing now. But we looked at T1, who were the best team in the world at the time. And even though they had a massive early game, they had I think they had maybe the second lowest Dragon take of any top-level team. And the lowest was like the 10th place team in the LCS or something, who just never could take any Dragons. And so we started watching their games and started seeing some of the things that they were doing instead. But also it was just quite difficult to understand, because looking at someone else, especially when they're playing at such a different level, there's probably stuff going on. It's not that you're not seeing, it's just that it's not happening. Because the example I always use is like, okay, they did a certain thing and then people countered it in practice. So then they countered the counter, and now you're seeing the counter of the counter, but you didn't see, the steps of how you got there. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was just take a few less Dragons. But then it happened often that we're in a situation where like, okay, look, Dragon is free here, so we take it. And I use that word very specifically. And so we started we implemented for, I think it was a full week in preseason. I said, you're not allowed to take dragons. And so for the first few times, it was quite funny. And Joko was, he did make it happen, but he did have a bit of fun with it at the beginning. There was a few times where we sort of double killed their bot lane. He'd run to Dragon Pit and look at me and say, am I really not allowed to take this? And I just said, no, definitely not. So I think he even a couple of times said in the comms, right, let's all just imagine we have 6% AP and AD from this dragon. Because John said we can't take it. But then what started happening is you have to do something else.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do with your tempo, with your time advantage? So even if, the first few times you just recalled instead of taking dragon, and suddenly we're out on the map 15 seconds quicker, and then the next play becomes slightly easier, or suddenly we prioritize getting like a deep ward, or we invade their red buff or something. And it gradually got more and more fluid until when we took away this rule and you're allowed to take dragons again, we did take some dragons, but we took far, far, far less than we did before. And we started realizing that free is definitely not the right word, because free, we were using it meaning they can't do anything while we're taking this. They're not going to get anything while we get this. Yeah. But we're not taking into account the opportunity cost and the fact that we're spending 15, 20 seconds time doing this, and time is the most valuable resource in League of Legends. So what could we have been doing with that time? And so that kind of thing has been really, really useful. But having specific purpose for why you're doing each one is, I think, really, really important. And that has been very useful. But it's only when like I can remember a specific thing we're trying to learn, and we could develop a specific kind of practice for that, where I think, that should be your approach in everything, but you're probably just going to fail to come up with a specific way to learn most of the things that you're going to learn, at least with the tools that we have. I put in our LEC application with Excel, the one thing, because they asked, like, what should we do to make esports better, basically? And I put, make a proper sandbox practice tool or save states in the game where we can just set up a Baron and then run that 5 times. So we've been asking for that for whatever it is, 7 years now, but it's I don't think it's ever going to happen, and so we're just going to have to work with the constraints that we have as coaches.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that dragon sort of constraint. I love it. It makes so much sense. As soon as you say, okay, we have to do something else instead, what opens up? And you can imagine like a deep ward would almost like keep dragon available to you whilst you have the early recall or stuff like that. That sounds so. Of course, I think the thing with, as soon as you get into these conversations, you get into like the nuance of the. Sometimes your champion really needs that buff, and to some extent, but like as a rule, like it's just interesting to explore when and why, and know that it's on the table.
Yeah,
it makes me think of again. I hate to always do this. It's been years since I was a head coach in basketball, but when I was, we used to have players that were quite athletic at a fairly high level, and they felt that their strength was getting out into the open court and beginning what we might call a fast break. So in training, if we were playing a game 5-on-5, one player would leak out and try and get a step on his man and sprint down the court as early as possible, and we'd often look for that long pass, easy basket. That's not what we wanted. That wasn't our weakness as a team. Our weakness was sort of being on the same page when it came to the slower 5-on-5 half-court play. So you take that away. Let's not do that because we have it. We know we've got it. Let's try and work on something else. And in basketball, quite simple. You know the situation is going to occur just like this. You know your 5 players. League of Legends, there are nuances to it. But as a rule, what a nice idea, I think.